The oldest docking computer on Kestrel Station had never been wrong. Not once. For 211 years, it had identified every vessel entering the station's jurisdiction before the ship completed its first braking burn. Freighters, hospital ships, military cruisers, pirate raiders disguised as salvage tugs, it didn't matter. Every engine signature, every hull geometry, every quantum wake belonged somewhere inside its memory. It had catalogued more than 87 million arrivals. At 3:40 station time, it encountered something it couldn't name. Unknown. Traffic control assumed the computer had failed. The backup array activated automatically. Unknown. The station's deep space gravimetric scanners swept the surrounding sector. Unknown. 3 independent military-grade sensor clusters came online. Unknown. Then every active scanner aboard Kestrel Station stopped seeing. Not because they malfunctioned. Not because they lost power. For 4 silent seconds, the entire station simply forgot how to observe the universe. When the systems returned, the mysterious vessel had already docked inside Ring 7. The official report later concluded that no anomaly had occurred. Every camera agreed. Every navigation log agreed. Every automated diagnostic agreed. Only one network refused to accept the report. The maintenance drones. Across the station, hundreds of repair units halted in perfect silence. A welding drone froze halfway through sealing a cargo hatch. A maintenance crawler emerging from an air duct stopped before its front wheels touched the floor. Cleaning drones abandoned polished corridors and quietly turned toward Dock Ring 7. None of them had received a command. None of them transmitted a signal. They simply waited. 3 levels below Ring 7, Callan Reed never saw any of it. He was lying beneath a battered mining shuttle with both arms buried inside an overheating coolant manifold. Blue coolant splashed directly into his face. He closed one eye. "I was trying to help." Behind him, a familiar mechanical voice answered. "The engine believes otherwise." Callan sighed. "You always take their side." "I take the side supported by evidence." He slid himself out from beneath the shuttle and looked toward the hovering maintenance drone. Pip had once been a standard station repair unit. Now almost nothing about him remained standard. One stabilizer was slightly crooked. His alloy shell carried years of scratches and weld marks. His optical lens blinked a fraction slower than factory specifications because Callan had replaced the original processor with 3 salvaged civilian chips held together by stubborn optimism. Somehow, it worked. So Callan asked, wiping coolant from his forehead, "What's today's diagnosis?" Pip projected the engine schematic. The previous mechanic installed a pressure regulator backwards. "I noticed." He also bypassed 2 safety interlocks. "I noticed." He appears to have believed maintenance manuals were merely suggestions. Callan smiled. "Now you're being judgmental. I downloaded a customer relations package." "Delete it." "I am considering your request." The engine behind them settled into a smooth, healthy rhythm. Callan rested one grease-covered hand against the housing. "There you go." Pip tilted his lens. "You continue speaking to machines. They listen. They possess no auditory receptors. They still listen." Pip paused. "I remain unconvinced." The workshop around them looked exactly like every independent repair shop at the edge of civilized space. Functional. Crowded. Well used. One ceiling light buzzed louder than it shone. Half the storage cabinets no longer matched, and the main welding bench had been repaired so many times that Callan honestly couldn't remember its original surface. Visitors saw an aging workshop. Callan saw 15 years of promises kept. The terminal chime. Pip looked first. "You have received another final notice." "I know." "You have not opened it." "I know what it says." The drone projected the notice anyway. Final berth notice. Outstanding dock fees. 184,220 credits. Payment due. 72 hours. Failure to remit payment will result in seizure of all registered equipment. Callan looked at it for barely a second before closing the window. Pip didn't say anything. Instead, he quietly watched Callan return to the mining shuttle. After a long silence he spoke. You repaired 2 refugee transports without charging labor. They couldn't afford labor. You restored Dock 17's atmospheric recyclers without sending an invoice. People needed air. You spent 6 months rebuilding old Mara's cargo tug after every licensed engineer declared it unsalvageable. Callan tightened one final bowl. It wasn't unsalvageable. It sank. It floated afterward. Despite everything. Callan laughed. Pip waited. Then delivered the observation without emotion. You cannot leave broken things broken. The wrench stopped moving. Callan didn't answer immediately. Finally he said, Probably not. It has already cost you 3 workshops. I know. It is about to cost you a 4th. Callan leaned against the engine housing. Maybe. Pip's lens dimmed slightly. I attempted to calculate a future in which you retire comfortably. And? There isn't one. Before Callan could answer, the workshop door slid open. A Trivoran miner stepped inside carrying a heavy payment case. He glanced toward the shuttle outside. It still sounds new. It'll keep sounding new if you stop ignoring the maintenance schedule. The miner laughed and placed the payment case on the counter. The terminal chimed. Pip looked at the balance. Then at Callan. He transferred 2,000 credits too much. Without checking the receipt, Callan tapped the refund command. The terminal confirmed the transfer. Refund complete. The miner frowned. You sent it back. You overpaid. I meant to. I know. The Trivoran studied him for a moment. You need those credits. Callan didn't answer. The miner looked toward the berth notice still glowing faintly in the corner of the terminal. You need them more than I do. Callan smiled. Maybe. Then why? Callan closed the payment screen. Because they aren't mine. Silence settled over the workshop. The miner looked from the refunded receipt to the berth notice, then back to Callan. His brow furrowed as though trying to solve a problem with no logical answer. You really think people remember things like this? Callan picked up his wrench. No. Then why return it? Because I wasn't owed it. The miner opened his mouth, closed it again. Then, with a slow nod, he picked up the payment case. I'll be back. I know. The door slid shut behind him. Neither Callan nor Pip noticed the woman standing beyond the workshop window. She had watched every second of the exchange. Slowly, she unfolded a thin black data slate. 41 names were listed on its surface. Without taking her eyes off Callan, she drew a single line through the first name. Then she folded the slate and slipped it back into her coat. Only after that did she knock. 3 quiet knocks. Not on the sensor. Not through the station network. On the door itself. Callan frowned. That's old-fashioned, Pip finished. For the first time that day, Callan walked toward the entrance without knowing that the next decision he made would change the fate of an empire. 3 quiet knocks. Not on the sensor. Not through the station network. On the door itself. Callan frowned. That's old-fashioned. Statistically obsolete, Pip corrected. Callan crossed the workshop, wiping grease from his hands with a stained cloth. For a moment he considered checking the security monitor. Instead, he reached for the handle. People who knocked deserved to be answered. The door slid open. The woman waiting outside didn't speak immediately. She simply studied him. Not the way customers usually did. Customers looked around the workshop first. They noticed the patched walls, the outdated equipment, the shelves full of parts rescued from ships everyone else had written off. She didn't. Her attention remained on Callan, as though confirming something against a picture only she could see. He found himself doing exactly the same thing. Not because she was beautiful. Because nothing about her made sense. Her travel coat looked ordinary until his eyes searched for stitching. There wasn't any. No seams. No reinforcement around the shoulders. No hidden fasteners. The fabric bent naturally with every movement, yet held its shape as though gravity had agreed to different rules. Impossible. His gaze dropped to the small travel case resting beside her boots. No manufacturer markings. No shipping tags. No access hinges. Even the handle appeared to have grown from the case itself. His fingers twitched. He wanted to take it apart. The woman noticed. You inspect everything. Callan smiled slightly. I fix things. There's a difference? The people who fix things usually inspect them first. For the first time since arriving. She smiled. It wasn't warm. It was surprise. Behind him, Pip floated a little closer. Normally the drone would already be scanning a visitor's identity tag. Instead, he remained perfectly still. Callan glanced sideways. Pip? The drone didn't answer. Its optical lens stayed fixed on the woman. Working, it said quietly. Callan frowned. You already said that. I am. The reply came half a second late. That had never happened before. The woman looked at Pip with quiet curiosity. Your drone asks questions. He asks too many. I've met machines that obey. Her eyes returned to Pip. They don't usually wonder. For a brief moment, Pip's optical lens dimmed. Not from low power. From hesitation. The woman looked back at Callan. I need a mechanic. He leaned lightly against the doorframe. There are larger repair bays. I visited them. They couldn't help. They tried. And? They attempted to replace what wasn't broken. Callan nodded almost instinctively. That usually gets expensive. It did. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Measured. Each waiting for the other to speak first. Finally Callan asked, What am I repairing? The woman looked over her shoulder toward Dock Ring 7. My ship. Callan followed her gaze through the workshop windows. He could only see the upper edge of the docking ring from here. Nothing else. I'll need to see it. I expected you would. She picked up the small travel case. It looked heavier than it should have been. Yet she lifted it with one hand. No strain. No adjustment. No wasted movement. Years of repairing cargo lifters had taught Callan one thing. People always prepared for weight. She didn't. Interesting. Pip drifted beside him as the workshop doors sealed behind them. The commercial corridors should have been crowded at this hour. Instead, people were standing still. Dockworkers, freighter crews, cargo inspectors. Nobody blocked the passage. Nobody spoke. Without realizing it, they slowly moved aside as the woman walked past. Not out of fear. Respect. No, something quieter. Instinct. Callan noticed. She didn't seem to. You know everyone here? No. They seem to know you. They're looking at the wrong person. Callan almost laughed. I'm the mechanic. Exactly. She continued walking. That answer somehow explained nothing. The closer they came to Dock Ring 7, the quieter the station became. Even the constant background vibration of station machinery seemed different. Lower. Slower. As if the entire docking ring had unconsciously matched the breathing rhythm of something sleeping inside. Pip broke the silence. I cannot establish a registry. The woman kept walking. I know. I cannot identify the propulsion architecture. I know. I cannot determine the hull composition. I know. Pip hesitated. I do not like not knowing. The woman finally looked at him. I imagine this is your first time. Pip didn't answer. Callan smiled to himself. That was probably true. They rounded the final corner. The blast doors of Dock Ring 7 stood open. Beyond them, space itself seemed brighter. Not because of lights. Because something inside the dock reflected starlight differently. Callan took one more step. Then stopped. The ship occupied almost the entire docking cradle. It wasn't enormous. It was impossible. For several long seconds he couldn't understand what he was seeing. Every instinct he'd developed over 15 years rejected it. Ships were built from sections, frames, armor plates, access panels, inspection ports, maintenance seams. This vessel had none. Its silver-white hull flowed from bow to stern without a single visible join. No welds, no bolts, no rivets, no repair scars, no evidence that anyone had ever assembled it. It looked grown. Callan walked forward without realizing he was moving. His hand slowly reached toward the hull. He stopped just before touching it. "May I?" The woman answered with the smallest nod. His fingertips rested against cool silver metal. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm. It felt alive. Not biologically. Mechanically. Like placing a hand against the chest of someone quietly breathing. Callan closed his eyes. He listened. Every engine had a rhythm. Every reactor had a pulse. Every damaged machine eventually confessed what hurt. This one was trying not to. When he opened his eyes again, he whispered the only words that made sense. "How?" His fingers traced the seamless hull once more. "Are you still flying?" The three quiet knocks echoed through the workshop. Not against the sensor panel. Not through the station network. Against the door itself. Callan frowned. "That's unusual." Pip's lens remained fixed on the entrance. Historical records indicate physical knocking was considered polite before automated access systems. So someone's either very old. Callan wiped his hands on a worn cloth. Or making a point. He crossed the workshop and pulled the door open. The woman waiting outside wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the terminal behind him. Specifically, the refund confirmation still glowing faintly in the corner of the display. She spoke without taking her eyes off it. "You returned 2,000 credits." It wasn't a question. Callan glanced at the terminal. "I did." "You needed them." Another statement. He looked back at her. "Seems you've been reading things that aren't yours." For the first time, she looked directly at him. Not offended. Interested. "I also saw the birth notice." "So did half the workshop." "You'll lose this place in 3 days." "Probably." "You still returned the money." Callan leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "They weren't my credits." Silence. The woman studied him for several seconds. Not his face. His answer. Then she reached into her coat and removed a thin black data slate. Callan caught only a glimpse before she unfolded it. A long list of names. Nothing else. She quietly drew a single line through the first entry. Folded the slate. Put it away. No explanation. Callan blinked. "Should I ask?" "No." "Fair enough." Another brief silence settled between them. This one felt different. Less like strangers meeting. More like two people deciding whether the other was worth another minute. Finally she asked, "Do you repair ships? Or only honest customers?" Callan smiled. "I repair whatever's broken." "Even when you shouldn't?" Pip answered before Callan could. "He cannot leave broken things broken." Callan sighed. "I really need to uninstall your honesty." "I have attempted." "It failed." "It usually does." The corner of the woman's mouth lifted almost imperceptibly. Not amusement. Approval. "My ship needs a mechanic." Callan folded his arms. "What's wrong with it?" "I don't know." "You own it." "Yes." "And you don't know?" "I know something is wrong." "That's different." "It refuses to tell anyone else." Now she had his attention. He's straightening. "How many mechanics?" 6. "Engine specialists?" 3. "Military engineers?" 1. "Manufacturer support?" "I built the manufacturer." Callan frowned. "Come again?" The woman simply looked at him. "I said too much." Pip's optical lens flickered. "I cannot identify your species." "I know." I cannot identify your vessel. I know. I cannot identify your accent. A pause. I know. Pip processed for a moment. I dislike this conversation. So do most computers. Callan ignored both of them. Instead he asked the only question that mattered. What did the other mechanics replace? The engine. They were wrong. The reactor. Wrong. The navigation core. Wrong. He tilted his head. They all replaced something. Without knowing why it failed. The woman nodded once. You inspected the repair orders. I requested copies. You expected I'd ask. I hoped. Callan reached for his tool case. I'll need to see the ship. She didn't move. Instead she asked one more question. If you discover you cannot repair it, I'll tell you. You won't pretend? No. You won't experiment with expensive parts? No. You won't guess? Callan closed the toolbox. If I start guessing, you hired the wrong mechanic. For the first time since arriving on Kestrel Station, she smiled without restraint. It transformed her face completely. Not because it made her prettier. Because for the first time, she looked relieved. She stepped aside. Then come. As they left the workshop, Pip drifted quietly behind them. After several meters he transmitted on a private channel only Callan could hear. I have reviewed the station cameras. And? They never recorded her arriving. Callan kept walking. Camera fault? I reviewed 6 independent systems. And? They all begin. Pip hesitated. With her already standing outside our door. Callan looked ahead at the woman walking calmly through the corridor. He felt something he hadn't expected to feel that morning. Not curiosity. Professional concern. Whatever waited in Dock Ring 7 was no ordinary repair job. The corridor ended at Dock Ring 7. Beyond the armored blast doors, the station had fallen strangely quiet. Not empty. Quiet. Engineers stood behind emergency barriers with diagnostic tablets hanging forgotten at their sides. Cargo crews whispered among themselves. 2 station security officers guarded the entrance, yet neither attempted to stop the woman as she approached. One of them started to speak. Ma'am, this dock is... His sentence died halfway through. Not because she interrupted him. Because he looked into her eyes. And quietly stepped aside. Callan noticed. Interesting. No authority badge. No diplomatic escort. No station credentials. Yet people kept making room. Not out of fear. Out of certainty. As if arguing with her had simply never occurred to them. The blast doors slid open. Cold air rolled out first. Then silence. Dock Ring 7 was enormous, built to service interstellar carriers nearly a kilometer long. For the first time since its construction, it looked too small. The ship rested alone in the center of the cradle. Callan stopped walking. Every engineer carried a picture of a perfect spacecraft somewhere in the back of their mind. This wasn't it. It was something else entirely. Ships were assembled. This one appeared to have happened. Its silver-white hull flowed without interruption from bow to stern. No welded plates. No inspection hatches. No maintenance panels. No visible fasteners. No access ports. Nothing. Every instinct Callan had developed over 15 years rejected what his eyes were seeing. Machines weren't born. They were built. This one refused to admit which. He walked forward slowly. Around him, the engineers watched in silence. One of them, a gray-haired woman wearing the insignia of the Imperial Engineering Guild, folded her arms. You'll waste your time. Callan didn't answer. Another engineer shook his head. We've scanned every square centimeter. Still no answer. A third spoke from behind a portable diagnostic station. There aren't any seams. Callan kept walking. The woman beside him finally broke the silence. They've been telling me what's impossible for 3 days. He stopped beside the bow, placed his toolbox on the deck, then looked back at the engineers. Did any of you touch it? Several exchanged confused glances. The gray-haired engineer frowned. Touch it? With your hands. We used multispectral scanners. I didn't ask that. Quantum resonance mapping. I didn't ask that either. Silence. Callan looked around the dock. So? He rested one hand against the hull. Did anyone actually touch it? Nobody answered. Callan nodded once. I thought so. Behind him, Pip whispered over their private channel. They're offended. They'll survive. He closed his eyes. The metal beneath his fingertips felt cool. Not cold. Cool. Like stone that had been resting beneath morning shade. He slowly moved his hand across the surface. Millimeter by millimeter. Feeling. Listening. Waiting. The dock remained silent. Then, he stopped. His thumb caught on something so small he almost missed it. Not a seam. Not a crack. A change. Less than the thickness of a human hair. He opened his eyes. There you are. The surrounding engineers leaned forward instinctively. Callan smiled to himself. Not because he had found the problem. Because he had found a question. He looked toward the woman. Permission? She answered with a single nod. He crouched beside the hull and removed a small brass feeler gauge from his toolbox. The oldest tool he owned. Every engineer behind him activated another scanner. Callan ignored them. Instead, he slid the thin strip of metal across the tiny irregularity. The gauge disappeared. Not into an opening. Into the hull itself. It was swallowed without resistance. Someone behind him gasped. Callan didn't, he simply stared. That's impossible. No, the woman said quietly. It's simply unfamiliar. Callan looked up at her. For everyone else, maybe. His eyes returned to the hull. But nothing is seamless. He stood. Walked 3 steps to the left. Pressed his palm against another section. Nothing. Another 3 steps. Nothing. 5 more. Then? The same tiny resistance. Another hidden boundary. His heartbeat quickened. He wasn't looking at armor. He was looking at growth rings. The realization hit him so suddenly he laughed. One short laugh. Not because it was funny. Because he'd finally stopped trying to understand the ship as something built. He turned toward the engineers. You've all been trying to repair a machine. The gray-haired engineer frowned. It is a machine. Callan shook his head. No. He looked back at the silver hull. You've been treating it like a machine. He rested one hand against it again. And it's been trying to heal. Silence filled Dock Ring 7. Even Pip said nothing. For several long seconds. The only sound came from the quiet pulse somewhere deep inside the impossible ship. The woman watched Callan with an expression she hadn't worn since arriving on Kestrel Station. Not surprise. Recognition. Very slowly. Her hand slipped into her coat. She unfolded the black slate again. 40 names remain. Without looking away from Callan, she crossed out another. Callan didn't move for several seconds. Around him, scanners hummed louder as every engineer attempted to verify what he had just discovered. None of them understood what they were looking for. Callan wasn't trying to prove them wrong. He was trying to understand the ship. He slowly ran his fingertips across the silver hull again, following the almost invisible line until it vanished beneath his palm. Do you know what every one of you has in common? He asked without turning around. The gray-haired engineer folded her arms. We've all repaired starships for decades. No. You've all assumed this ship was designed to be repaired. Silence. Callan looked at the woman beside him. Who built it? She answered without hesitation. My people. No. Her expression changed slightly. Excuse me? Who built the first one? She remained silent. He nodded. I thought so. He turned back toward the hull. This wasn't manufactured. One of the engineers laughed. Of course it was. Callan smiled. No, it was grown. Several voices protested at once. That's impossible. No material. Starships aren't organisms. Callan raised one hand. I'm not saying it's alive. The duck fell quiet again. I'm saying you've been asking the wrong question. He tapped gently against the hull with one knuckle. This outer shell isn't armor. The nearest engineer frowned. Our density scans say otherwise. They're right. So armor is only one of its jobs. Callan crouched beside the hull and removed a small inspection mirror from his toolbox. Not an expensive scanner. Not a quantum probe. Just polished glass attached to an old brass handle. Pip drifted closer. I do not understand. You will. Callan angled the mirror until reflected station light skimmed across the silver surface. Immediately, the almost invisible growth boundaries became visible. Not seams. Layers. Thousands of microscopic layers. The dock filled with quiet gasps. They're stress channels, Callan whispered. No. He corrected himself. Their memory. The gray-haired engineer stepped closer. What does that mean? Callan stood. Every jump through folded space puts microscopic stress into the hull. She nodded. Correct. So your engineers designed armor that resists stress. Another nod. They designed armor that remembers it. Nobody spoke. He pointed toward the faint branching patterns now visible beneath the reflected light. The hull has been trying to redistribute accumulated stress for years. One engineer frowned. Our scans never showed internal fractures. Because there aren't any. Callan smiled. The ship isn't damaged. He looks toward the Queen. It's exhausted. The duck became perfectly still. The woman stared at him. Not because of his conclusion. Because of the word he had chosen. Exhausted. Not broken. Not failing. Tired. As though he had described a living crew member instead of a machine. Callan looked back at the ship. I've spent 15 years repairing mining equipment. Several engineers exchanged confused looks. So miners don't stop because parts wear out. He rested one hand against the hull again. They stop because people keep asking them to carry one more impossible load. He smiled softly. Machines are more honest than we are. The woman spoke for the first time in almost a minute. What does it need? Callan answered immediately. Rest. The engineers almost laughed. One actually did. You're joking. Callan ignored him. You've replaced engines. Silence. You've replaced navigation cores. More silence. You've replaced half the internal systems. The gray-haired engineer looked away. He nodded. And every time. He looked around the dock. You asked this ship to work harder. Pip finally understood. His optical lens brightened. The vessel has been compensating for accumulated structural fatigue instead of component failure. Callan smiled. Exactly. So? Pip hesitated. Nothing is actually broken. Callan looks toward the Queen. Not permanently. She stepped closer. If you're right. I am. How do we repair it? Callan slowly closed his toolbox. We don't. Confusion swept across the dock. He pointed toward the enormous maintenance cradle suspended beneath the flagship. Disconnect every external power feed. What? Every diagnostic cable. The engineers stared. Open every restraint. One engineer protested. The vessel could drift. It won't. Another shook his head. Without station support it'll shut down. Callan looked at the silver hull. No. His voice had become almost gentle. It'll finally sleep. Nobody move. Callan sighed. You asked me to repair your ship. He looked directly at the Queen. This is the repair. For several long seconds. The entire dock waited for her answer. She looked at the flagship. Then at the dozens of engineers. Finally. Back at Callan. Do it. The order was quiet. Absolute. No one argued. Power couplings disconnected one after another. Heavy magnetic restraints released. Diagnostic umbilicals withdrew from the hull. One by one. The constant alarms that had echoed through Dock Ring 7 for 3 days disappeared. Silence. Complete silence. For nearly 10 seconds. Nothing happened. Then, a deep resonance rolled through the ship. Not an engine. Not a reactor. A single, contented pulse. The silver hull shimmered almost imperceptibly. The microscopic stress channels slowly faded, as though thousands of invisible muscles had finally relaxed. Across the dock, every engineer forgot to breathe. Pip quietly whispered. It wasn't asking for repairs. Callan smiled. No. He picked up his toolbox. It was asking for permission to stop. Behind him, the woman closed her eyes. Not in relief. In certainty. Slowly, she reached into her coat. The black slate appeared once more. 39 names remain. Without hesitation, she drew another line. The pulse rolled through the flagship only once. Then the dock became silent again. No alarms. No warning lights. No frantic engineers shouting fresh diagnostics. For the first time in 3 days, the ship wasn't asking anyone for anything. It simply rested. Callan watched the silver hull for another few seconds before nodding to himself. There. He closed the clasps on his toolbox. Leave her disconnected for 12 hours. The gray-haired engineer stared. 12 hours? Minimum. But the Queen's flagship. She stopped herself. Too late. Callan looked up. The what? No one answered. The engineer quietly lowered her eyes. Interesting. Callan looked toward the woman. She seemed almost annoyed. Not at him. At the engineer. The silence stretched. Finally, Callan shrugged. Fine. He picked up his toolbox. My work's finished. He started walking toward the dock exit. He had almost reached the blast doors when every light inside Dock Ring 7 dimmed. Not failed. Dim? A single deep tone echoed through the station. Once. Twice. 3 times. Every engineer in the dock stopped moving. The woman quietly closed her eyes. That's earlier than I expected. Callan turned. What is? Before she could answer, the massive blast doors began to open. Not quickly. Ceremonially. A line of armored guards entered first. Their armor wasn't built for intimidation. It was built for history. White alloy engraved with flowing silver patterns. Each carried a long ceremonial spear instead of a rifle. None looked toward Callan. Every one of them looked only at the woman. Behind them came officials. Military officers. Judges. Nobles wearing colors Callan had never seen before. The dock, moments ago full of engineers, transformed into a royal procession. Nobody had given an order. Yet every person present stepped aside. Then, one by one, they knelt. Every engineer. Every guard. Every official. Even the gray-haired master engineer who had argued with Callan lowered herself onto one knee without hesitation. Only 2 people remained standing. Callan and the woman. He looked around the dock in complete confusion. What's happening? The woman released a slow breath. I was hoping we'd have another day. An elderly official approached her. His robe carried dozens of insignias from civilization scattered across the galaxy. He stopped 3 paces away. Then bowed, so deeply his forehead nearly touched the deck. His voice echoed across the silent dock. Your Majesty. Callan felt his stomach tighten. The selection council has assembled. Silence. No dramatic music. No speeches. Just those 4 words hanging in the air. Your Majesty. Callan slowly turned toward the woman. She met his eyes with an expression halfway between apology and resignation. I suppose introductions are overdue. Callan looked from her to the kneeling officials. To the impossible flagship. Then back again. You. He couldn't finish the sentence. She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. My name is Lysra Vale. A brief pause. I am queen of the Asterian sovereignty. Callan blinked once. Twice. Then laugh. Not because it was funny. Because it was impossible. You're serious? I wish I wasn't. He looks toward the kneeling crowd again. Nobody moved. Nobody smiled. Nobody corrected her. Every instinct he possessed finally accepted what his mind had been refusing since she knocked on his workshop door. She really was their queen. His thoughts immediately jumped backward. The hidden slate. The crossed-out names. The questions. The tests. The impossible ship. You weren't looking for a mechanic. Lysra held his gaze. No. You were judging one. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Everything suddenly fit together. Callan rubbed a hand across the back of his neck. So? He looks toward the flagship. This wasn't really about repairing a ship. A faint smile touched the Queen's face. It began that way. And now? Before she could answer, another voice echoed from beyond the kneeling assembly. Your Majesty. A younger official stepped forward carrying a crystalline case sealed with the royal crest. The remaining candidates have arrived. Candidates? Callan frowned. What candidates? The Queen looked at him for a long moment. Then quietly said the words that would change the course of his life forever. They believe they're here to become my king. She paused. They don't yet realize I've already met the only man who repaired the one thing none of them even understood. Callan stared at her. I'm not one of your candidates. No. You never applied. No. I don't belong here. For the first time since arriving on Kestrel Station, Queen Lysra smiled with complete certainty. No. She said softly. You belong exactly where you are. The massive doors behind the royal delegation opened once more. 40 of the most powerful men in the galaxy entered the dock. Every one of them stopped the instant they saw an oil-stained mechanic standing beside their queen. Every one of them looked confused. Every one of them underestimated him. Callan had no idea that before the sun rose again, every one of them would become his rival. 40 of the most powerful men in the known galaxy entered Dock Ring 7. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. Power had a way of announcing itself without words. Royal banners drifted behind them, suspended by invisible fields. White ceremonial armor reflected the silver glow of the flagship. Nobles, admirals, governors, and kings walked with the quiet certainty of men accustomed to being the most important person in every room they entered. Until today. Their procession slowed. Not because of the Queen. Because of the man standing beside her. Callan Reed still held his toolbox. A streak of coolant ran across one sleeve of his dark work jacket. His hair was slightly out of place from crawling beneath an engine barely an hour earlier, and a brass feeler gauge remained tucked absent-mindedly into his breast pocket. He looked less like someone greeting royalty, and more like someone wondering whether he had forgotten to lock his workshop. No one had prepared the candidates for this. Their gazes moved from the Queen to the mechanic, then back again. Questions spread through the room faster than whispers ever could. The silence lasted just long enough to become uncomfortable. Then Callan leaned toward Pip. Are they waiting for something? The little drone rotated one optic toward the assembled rulers. I believe they are waiting for you. What for? I have insufficient data. Callan nodded thoughtfully. That's fair. The answer broke something invisible. Not the silence. The tension. One of the younger guards near the entrance lowered his eyes to hide the corner of a smile. Commander Kaler noticed. Interesting. The guard had stood motionless through pirate invasions and assassination attempts. A mechanic had unsettled his discipline in less than 30 seconds. At the front of the procession stood an elderly man wearing robes instead of armor. Unlike the others, he didn't study Callan. He studied the Queen. High Chancellor Malvik watched her the way astronomers watched eclipses. Patiently. Carefully. Looking for changes too small for anyone else to notice. She had not moved since revealing herself. Yet her breathing had slowed. Her shoulders had relaxed by a fraction. She had chosen to remain beside the mechanic instead of returning to the center of the royal delegation. Tiny decisions. Most people never saw such things. Malvik had built a career upon them. He smiled. Warm. Measured. Entirely practiced. Your Majesty. Seraphine inclined her head. Chancellor. The selection council is assembled. I can see that. No irritation. No warmth. Simply acknowledgement. Malvik accepted it without offense. The candidates have traveled a great distance. They have. They are eager to begin. A pause. So am I. The answer surprised several of the assembled rulers. It surprised Malvik most of all. For years the Queen had postponed every council, every introduction, every carefully arranged alliance. Today, there wasn't the slightest hesitation. Interesting. Very interesting. King Edric of Talon stepped forward first. He was older than most. His beard carried more silver than black, and countless diplomatic victories had softened neither his posture nor his voice. He bowed deeply. It is an honor, Your Majesty. She returned the courtesy with a graceful inclination of her head. Welcome to Asteria. His eyes shifted. Only briefly. Toward Callan. Then back again. I confess. He said. I did not expect our first audience to include another guest. The words were perfectly polite, which made them considerably sharper. Callan looked behind himself. Finding no one there, he pointed a thumb toward his own chest. Me? King Edric smiled. I believe so. Oh. Callan glanced at Seraphine. I can wait outside if this is official business. For the first time since entering the dock, every member of the selection council looked directly at the Queen. Her answer would define the room. She met Callan's eyes. No. Just one word. Come. Certain. You stay. Nothing more. No explanation. No justification. Yet somehow, 40 rulers understood that the conversation was over. Torren Voss watched from the edge of the dock with folded arms. He had spent 3 sleepless nights trying to save the flagship. 3 days of calculations. 3 days of simulations. 3 days proving why he was considered one of the finest engineers in existence. Then a station mechanic had arrived, closed his eyes, touched the hull, and listened. Torren disliked stories that rewarded intuition over expertise. Except, that wasn't what had happened. Callan hadn't guessed. He had observed. Patiently. Carefully. Exactly as an engineer should. The realization irritated him more than failure itself. Pip drifted closer to Callan. Heart rate elevated. Callan blinked. Mine? Marginally. I hadn't noticed. You rarely do. I'll be fine. I agree. The drone rotated toward the assembled rulers. They appear significantly less fine. A faint sound escaped somewhere in the crowd. Not laughter. The beginning of it. Several candidates looked at the drone. Then at the mechanic who apparently allowed machines to interrupt conversations with kings. One prince frowned. Your maintenance unit speaks freely. Callan looked at Pip. So he does. You permit this? I've tried stopping him. Pip answered first. He was unsuccessful. Callan sighed. I was. Another ripple moved through the dock. This time, more than one smile appeared. Seraphine noticed. She said nothing. Instead, she quietly watched the candidates. Not the ones trying hardest to appear impressive. The ones who smiled despite themselves. Malvik saw it. Again. The mechanic wasn't trying to win anyone. Yet every conversation bent toward him naturally. That was dangerous. Influence earned accidentally was often stronger than influence pursued deliberately. He filed the observation away. An attendant approached the queen and bowed. "Your Majesty. The palace is prepared." She nodded once. "Good." The attendant hesitated. "The formal procession." His eyes flickered uncertainly toward Callan. "Awaits your instruction." For several seconds, Seraphine looked toward the impossible flagship. The silver hull rested peacefully inside the cradle. No alarms. No warning lights. No frantic engineers. Only silence. She turned back. "We proceed." The attendant bowed again. "And the mechanic, Your Majesty?" Every eye in Dock Ring 7 shifted once more. Callan scratched lightly behind one ear. "If someone could point me toward the nearest shuttle back to Kestrel." "He comes with us." The words were quiet. Matter of fact. Absolute. No one argued. Not because they agreed. Because the Queen had already decided. Malvek lowered his eyes. Another tiny change. Another decision she had not discussed with the Council. 3 names crossed from the slate. And now? The mechanic was entering the palace. The game had begun long before any of the candidates realized they were playing it. As the royal procession turned toward the waiting transports, Callan adjusted the weight of his old toolbox and fell into step without ceremony. He never noticed the 40 rulers watching him. He never noticed Torin studying the brass tools hanging from his belt. He never noticed Kaler silently moving closer, as though guarding him had become as natural as guarding the Queen herself. Only Seraphine noticed all 3. And for the first time in many years, she'd allowed herself the smallest trace of hope. No one had expected the Queen to walk. The royal procession had arrived with enough ceremonial transports to carry an army. Gleaming grav carriages hovered beyond the dock, each marked with the crest of the Asterian sovereignty. Rows of guards stood ready beside them, motionless beneath banners of white and silver. By every tradition, the Queen should have entered first. Instead, she remained where she was. Waiting. Callan frowned at the line of vehicles. "They're nice." Pip scanned the nearest one. "They cost approximately 412 times the value of your workshop." Callan looked back at his toolbox. "Still wouldn't fit all my wrenches." Pip considered that an acceptable criticism. A guard coughed into his fist. It was suspiciously close to laughter. High Chancellor Malvik noticed. The guard had forgotten protocol. Again. This was becoming contagious. The mechanic wasn't entertaining people. He was reminding them they were people. Dangerous. Very dangerous. The Queen turned toward Callan. "Master Reed." He looked up. "Yes. You'll ride with me." Around the dock. Conversation died before it began. One prince actually blinked. Commander Kaler's expression remained perfectly composed, though internally he was already recalculating tomorrow's security plan. Malvik's smile never changed. Only his eyes did. One decision. Another thread pulled loose from 20 years of carefully woven politics. Callan scratched his temple. "Are you sure?" "Yes. I don't really know the rules." "You don't need to." He nodded. "Makes things easier." He started toward the nearest vehicle. An attendant hurried forward. "Sir." Callan stopped. "I believe this entrance is reserved for Her Majesty." "Oh." He stepped back immediately. "Sorry." The attendant turned toward the Queen, clearly waiting for correction. None came. Seraphine simply entered the carriage. Then looked back toward Callan. "You're coming." He hesitated only long enough to pick up his toolbox again. "Right." He climbed inside. Without realizing he'd just broken nearly 800 years of royal protocol. Prince Cashin watched the door close. His jaw tightened. "The mechanic?" A neighboring king answered quietly. "So it would seem." "He repaired a ship." "So I've heard." Cashin looked toward Malvek. Surely the Chancellor would intervene. Surely this couldn't continue. Malvik merely adjusted one sleeve. Interesting. If the Queen intended to reveal her priorities this early, perhaps he could use them. The carriage lifted silently. Dock Ring 7 disappeared beneath them. Callan leaned toward the window. The city unfolded below. Spires of living crystal reached toward the stars. Bridges curved between towers without visible support. Gardens bloomed on rooftops hundreds of meters above the streets. Ships drifted through invisible traffic lanes like schools of luminous fish. He didn't speak for almost a minute. Finally, "How did they clean the windows?" Seraphine looked at him. "The windows? Someone has to." She followed his gaze toward a tower that vanished into the clouds. For the first time in years, she realized she didn't know. An attendant had probably submitted reports. Someone else had approved budgets. The work itself had remained invisible. Callan continued studying the tower. They'd need special harnesses. He smiled to himself. Wouldn't be an easy job. Seraphine quietly looked away. Pip floated near the ceiling. "I believe you've accidentally created another philosophical discussion." "I asked about windows." "I know." Silence settled again. Not uncomfortable. Simply quiet. Outside, the capital shimmered beneath the evening light. Finally Seraphine spoke. "You weren't curious." Callan looked over. "About what?" "My identity." "You told me." "I mean before." He thought for a moment. "I figured you'd tell me if it mattered." "And if I never had?" "I would have repaired your ship anyway." No hesitation. No performance. Just an answer. She looked out across her city before replying. "I know." Far behind them, another carriage carried Torin Voss and Commander Kaler. The engineer remained unusually quiet. Kaler finally spoke. "You've been thinking." "I dislike it." "What?" "The mechanic." Kaler almost smiled. "Join the club." Torin folded his arms. "He isn't extraordinary." "No." "He observes." "Yes." "He listens." "Yes." "He asks simple questions." "Yes." Torin exhaled slowly. "Why don't we?" Kaler looked through the window toward the lead carriage. "Because we're usually too busy proving we already know the answer." Neither man spoke again. At the rear of the procession, Malvik sat alone. His carriage contained no attendants. He preferred silence when thinking. The Queen had crossed out 3 names. She'd brought the mechanic to the palace. She'd laughed. 3 events. Entirely unrelated on the surface. Entirely connected underneath. He closed his eyes. Power was rarely taken. It drifted. Quietly. Imperceptibly. Toward those people trusted without effort. Callan Reed had acquired trust in less than 1 day. That made him not an enemy. Not yet. But certainly a variable. And variables had a habit of becoming crises. The palace appeared above the horizon. Even Callan forgot to speak. It wasn't one building. It was a city built into a mountain of crystal that seemed to grow directly from the planet itself. Bridges floated between impossible towers. Waterfalls poured upward into the sky before dissolving into clouds of light. He stared for several long seconds. Then quietly asked, "Who maintains all this?" Seraphine turned. "You keep asking that." "I know. You haven't said it's beautiful." He smiled faintly. "It is." A pause. "But beautiful things don't stay beautiful by themselves." Her eyes remained on him. No one had ever looked at her palace that way. Kings admired it. Generals measured it. Diplomats envied it. A mechanic wondered who repaired the leaks. Something unexpectedly warm settled behind her composed expression. She didn't let it show. The palace gates opened. Thousands of guards stood in perfect formation. Citizens filled terraces overlooking the arrival court. As the royal procession descended, A single ceremonial bell rang across the capital. Once, twice, 3 times. The Queen's return had been announced. Callan looked out the window. That's a lot of people. It is. They're all waiting for you. She looked at the crowds. No. He frowned. What do you mean? Without taking her eyes from the people gathered below, she answered softly. They're waiting for whoever I choose next. The words lingered between them. For the first time, Callan truly understood. This wasn't a ceremony. It wasn't a celebration. An entire empire was holding its breath. The carriage settled onto the landing platform. Outside, the palace doors began to open. Standing at the top of the grand staircase, waiting alone, was a young girl of perhaps 12 years old. She didn't bow. She didn't wait for permission. The instant she saw the Queen, she ran. Straight past every guard. Straight past every noble. Straight toward Seraphine. Then, without the slightest hesitation, she threw her arms around the Queen. And for the first time since Callan had met her, Queen Seraphine completely forgot to be a queen. The entire royal landing court froze. Hundreds of guards stood motionless. Ministers stopped halfway through their bows. The assembled candidates stared up the marble staircase in stunned silence. Protocol had just shattered. The young girl ignored every rule ever written. She ran with all the determination only a child possessed. White slippers slapped against polished crystal. Silver hair streamed behind her like sunlight caught in water. She threw herself into the Queen's arms. You're late. The accusation carried all the weight of someone who had spent the last hour counting every passing minute. For the first time since Callan had met her, Queen Seraphine laughed without restraint. I'm 17 minutes late. 18. I stand corrected. The Queen knelt, smoothing a loose strand of silver hair behind the girl's ear. I assume you've already checked every clock in the palace. I checked 6. Only 6? The 7th was wrong. It wasn't wrong. It was. It was 2 seconds slow. The girl folded her arms triumphantly. Exactly. Callan blinked. He looked at Pip. Did the Queen just lose an argument to a 12-year-old? Pip rotated one optic. I believe the Queen intentionally surrendered. That's allowed? I suspect only to her. None of the candidates moved. Prince Cashin quietly cleared his throat. Who is the child? King Edric answered without taking his eyes off the staircase. The princess. Cashin frowned. I wasn't informed Her Majesty had an heir. Neither were most of us. The girl finally noticed the crowd. Her bright sapphire eyes swept over rows of nobles, generals, and kings with only passing curiosity. Then they stopped. On Callan. She tilted her head. He tilted his. For several seconds, they simply examined one another. Finally she pointed. You're dirty. Callan looked down at his sleeve. You're right. He brushed at the grease stain. It refused to cooperate. I've been trying to fix that. She considered this carefully. You're not very good at cleaning. No. I'm much better at repairing. The girl accepted that answer immediately. Makes sense. She walked straight toward him. Every guard stiffened. Commander Kaler instinctively shifted one step forward. The Queen raised a single finger. Barely an inch. Kaler stopped. The girl stopped directly in front of Callan. Up close, he noticed the tiny scorch mark on one sleeve of her dress. Someone else probably wouldn't have. Mechanics noticed damage. You burned your cuff. She immediately looked down. What? Here. He gently pointed. Probably from leaning too close to a heater. She stared at the tiny mark. Nobody noticed that. You didn't either. I was reading. What were you reading? A book. Good choice. She narrowed her eyes. You didn't ask which book. I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to. A smile slowly spread across her face. I like him. The words echoed far louder than she'd intended. Several candidates visibly stiffened. Malvik didn't, he simply watched. Interesting. Children possessed remarkably poor political instincts, which often made them excellent judges of character. Seraphine observed the exchange in silence. Leora had spoken to 40 candidates over the years. She found fault with nearly all of them within minutes. Too loud. Too proud. Too false. This conversation had lasted less than 60 seconds. Already, she was smiling. Seraphine lowered her eyes before anyone noticed. Leora circled Callan once. Slowly. Like someone inspecting a particularly interesting machine. You smell funny. Engine coolant. Does it wash off? Eventually. She nodded. Good. Another pause. Do you fix toys? Callan thought for a moment. If they're broken. I have one. I guessed. It stopped singing. I can take a look. The princess looks toward the queen. Can he? Seraphine answered without hesitation. If he agrees. Callan shrugged. I've repaired stranger things. Pip quietly whispered. Statistically true. A ripple of murmured conversation spread through the gathered candidates. Not because of the toy. Because the queen had just rearranged the palace schedule. For a mechanic. Again. Malvik quietly filed another observation away. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. An elderly woman approached from the palace entrance. She wore no crown. No jewels. Only simple gray robes edged with silver thread. Every servant bowed as she passed. Even Kaler inclined his head. Leora immediately brightened. Grandmother. The woman smiled warmly before embracing the young princess. Then her gaze settled upon Seraphine. You've returned safely. I have. And this? Her attention shifted toward Callan. Must be the mechanic. Callan extended one grease-marked hand automatically. Callan Reed. The old woman looked at his hand. Then took it without hesitation. I know. Her grip was surprisingly firm. My name is Elira. You've got a beautiful home. It isn't mine. No. It belongs to everyone who protects it. Callan smiled. I like that answer. Elira studied him for another quiet moment. Then released his hand. So do I. Behind them. Malvik's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. The queen trusted the mechanic. The princess liked him. Now. The dowager queen approved of him. 3 generations. In a single afternoon. That wasn't luck. That was momentum. And momentum, if left unchecked, became history. A palace steward hurried up the staircase, breathing harder than protocol allowed. He bowed quickly. Your Majesty. The council requests that the welcoming banquet begin immediately. Seraphine nodded. Very well. The steward hesitated. There is one complication. Malvik turned slightly. What complication? The steward swallowed. The seating arrangements. Silence. The mechanic. He looked nervously toward Callan. Does not appear on the official guest register. Callan immediately lifted a hand. Oh. That's easy. I'll eat somewhere else. Every steward in earshot relaxed. Problem solved. Before anyone else could speak, Leora grabbed Callan's sleeve. No. The entire staircase turned toward her. He's eating with us. The steward looked horrified. Your Highness. She folded her arms. You said guests should never eat alone. The steward looked desperately toward the queen. Seraphine met her daughter's eyes. Then quietly said, The princess is correct. The steward closed his ledger. Yes, Your Majesty. Malvik looked toward the sky for the briefest moment. The game had changed again. Not because of politics. Because of kindness. and kindness, was proving far more difficult to counter than ambition. Far beyond the palace walls, deep beneath the capital, something ancient stirred inside the resting flagship. A single silver pulse traveled silently through its living hull. No alarm sounded. No engineer noticed. But somewhere, far beyond the edge of known space, something answered. The Grand Hall of Asteria had witnessed coronations, declarations of war, peace accords that ended centuries of bloodshed. Tonight, it witnessed something considerably stranger. A mechanic trying to decide which fork belonged to the soup. Callan studied the place setting with quiet concentration. 3 forks, 4 spoons, 5 glasses. Heap. The drone floated discreetly behind his chair. Yes. Why are there so many? I believe they correspond to the order of the courses. There are 12. There appear to be 12 courses. Callan looked toward the endless length of the royal table. That's excessive. Across the table, Princess Leora heard him. It used to be 14. Callan looked horrified. What happened? They removed 2 after Uncle Rowan fell asleep during dessert. Sensible decision. The princess nodded solemnly. I thought so. A few nearby attendants quickly lowered their heads. One shoulder shook ever so slightly. The queen entered last. Every conversation ceased. Every guest rose. Callan stood as well, though half a second later than everyone else. Not from disrespect. Simply because he had been trying to determine whether the folded napkin was decorative or functional. Seraphine noticed. She almost smiled. Almost. As tradition demanded, the queen remained standing until every guest had taken their seat. The candidates watched carefully. Protocol mattered. Everything tonight would be measured, evaluated, remembered. Seraphine sat. The room followed. Callan sat too. Then immediately stood again. Sorry. I think I was early. Leora giggled. The queen simply gestured toward the chair. You're allowed. He sat once more. I'm getting better. Pip leaned closer. Statistically. High Chancellor Malvik observed the room over the rim of his crystal glass. The candidates were watching the queen. The queen was occasionally watching the mechanic. Only for brief moments. Enough. He made no note. He didn't need to. Some observations carved themselves into memory. The first course arrived. Crystal bowls filled with a pale silver broth that shimmered beneath the hall lights. Callan waited until everyone else lifted their spoons. Then quietly copied them. Leora noticed immediately. You've never eaten moon soup. No. It changes flavor. He blinked. It what? Every 3 sips. Why? She considered the question. I don't know. I think someone got bored. Callan nodded approvingly. That's actually believable. He took the first spoonful. His eyebrows lifted. Tastes like roasted mushrooms. Second spoonful. He frowned. Now citrus. Third. How? Princess Leora looked delighted. I know. Callan looked into the bowl. Then held it slightly toward the light. He gently rotated it once. Twice. Seraphine watched him from across the table. He wasn't eating anymore. He was inspecting it. Of course he was. What are you doing? Leora asked. I'm cheating. You can do that? I don't know yet. He leaned closer. There. Leora followed his gaze. Tiny silver strands floated just beneath the surface. Barely visible. They're moving. Callan nodded. Temperature? What about it? They're changing the flavor whenever the soup cools. Leora stared. Really? He smiled. I think so. She immediately looks toward the nearest royal chef. Is he right? The elderly chef blinked in surprise. Yes, Your Highness. The princess looked back at Callan with genuine amazement. How did you know? Callan shrugged. Everything leaves clues. Across the table, Chief Engineer Torin Voss slowly lowered his spoon. Again. No scanners. No laboratory. No equations. Just observation. He was beginning to dislike how often that worked. The meal continued. Conversation gradually returned. Trade. Politics. Military campaigns. Each candidate found subtle ways to mention victories without appearing boastful. Callan mostly listened. Occasionally nodding. Occasionally asking questions that somehow made everyone else reconsider their answers. General Adrastus described reinforcing frontier defenses. Callan asked, "How long does maintenance take?" The general frowned. "For what?" "The walls. They're fortifications." "I know. They still need maintenance." Adrastus paused. 3 weeks. What happens if something breaks during those 3 weeks? The general looked thoughtful. No one had asked that before. King Edric proudly described a bridge connecting 2 continents on his homeworld. It has stood for 400 years. Callan smiled. Then whoever maintains it deserves an award. Edric laughed politely. No one maintains it. Callan's smile faded. Someone does. No. It simply endures. Callan looked genuinely unconvinced. Nothing simply endures. The old king fell silent. For the first time in decades, he found himself wondering who actually inspected the bridge. Seraphine noticed the pattern. Every ruler described accomplishments. Callan asked about the people no one mentioned afterward. Halfway through the banquet, musicians began playing softly from the upper galleries. Leora leaned toward Callan. "My toy." "Oh." He reached into one of the countless pockets stitched inside his work jacket. "Do you have it?" She proudly produced a small silver bird no larger than her palm. Its wings were beautifully crafted. One eye glowed faintly. The other remained dark. Callan turned it over carefully. "Permission?" She nodded eagerly. He didn't open it immediately. Instead, he gently wound the tiny key on its side. Nothing happened. He listened, then held it close to his ear. The hall continued talking around them. Callan ignored every voice. He gave the bird one tiny shake. A faint rattle answered. "There you are." Leora leaned closer. "You found it?" "I found something." He removed an impossibly small screwdriver from his toolkit. Several candidates stopped speaking altogether. He wasn't using palace instruments. He carried tools this small every day. 3 careful turns. The tiny panel lifted away. Inside, a single gear sat slightly crooked. Callan smiled. "You dropped it." Leora looked guilty. "Maybe." The gear jumped. "It does that sometimes." He laughed quietly. "I'm sure it does." With one fingertip, he nudged the gear back into place. Clicked, the panel closed. Turned the key once more. The silver bird chirped. Then began singing a bright, cheerful melody that echoed gently through the hall. Leora's face lit up. "It works." It was never really broken. She hugged the bird tightly. Then, without thinking, hugged Callan too. The entire hall fell silent. Every candidate, every servant, every minister. The princess had embraced the mechanic. Callan looked mildly surprised. "You're welcome." Leora stepped back, blushing. "Sorry." "It's all right. I forget." "So do I." At the head of the table, Seraphine looked down into her untouched tea. The faintest smile touched her lips. She hid it behind the cup. Malvik saw it anyway. Again. Not because Callan had repaired something. Because he'd made Leora laugh. Politics could be negotiated. Military strength could be measured. This could neither be bought nor ordered. For the first time in many years, The Chancellor felt something unfamiliar. Concern. Suddenly, a palace bell rang once. Not the ceremonial bell. A sharp bell. Urgent. Every guard in the hall stood instantly. Kaler's hand moved to his sword. An officer hurried through the great doors. He bowed only once. Your Majesty. His voice carried an edge no one missed. We've received a transmission. Seraphine rose. From whom? The officer hesitated. His face had lost all color. We don't know. Silence filled the hall. It isn't addressed to the council. It isn't addressed to the fleet. It isn't even addressed to the crown. He looked directly at Callan. It's asking. The officer swallowed hard. For the mechanic who taught the sleeping starship how to rest. The singing bird in Lelora's hands fell silent. No one in the hall spoke. Because no one, except the Queen, had ever used those words. No one moved. The officer remained bowed before the Queen, but his eyes never left Callan. The silence inside the grand hall became almost tangible. It wasn't fear. It was confusion. Callan slowly looked behind himself. Finding no one, he pointed at his own chest. Me? The officer nodded once. Yes, Master Reed. Callan frowned. I don't know anyone here. No, Pip murmured. You apparently do. Several candidates exchanged uneasy glances. King Edric spoke first. What exactly was transmitted? The officer swallowed. A single message. Audio? No. Video? No. He hesitated. It appeared inside every communication system connected to the Royal Fleet simultaneously. Chief Engineer Torin leaned forward. Impossible. We believed so as well. The fleet uses isolated quantum channels. I know. They cannot all be accessed from one origin. I know. The officer looked toward the Queen. Yet they were. Seraphine remained standing. Bring it. The officer produced a crystal memory shard no larger than a fingertip. It refused duplication. He placed it carefully onto the conference pedestal. It refused transmission. It refused recording. Another pause. It insisted on being delivered. Torin frowned. Machines don't insist. No. The officer answered quietly. This one did. The crystal awakened. Not with light. With sound. A single note echoed gently through the hall. The same deep resonance Callan had heard inside the flagship. Not an engine. A heartbeat. The air shimmered. Tiny lines of silver light spread outward before joining together. A figure slowly formed above the pedestal. Not solid. Not transparent. Memory. Ancient memory. The silhouette stood taller than any human. Its features shifted constantly, impossible to focus on. Every candidate instinctively straightened. Even Kaler's hand drifted toward his sword. Callan simply tilted his head. Huh. Pip rotated toward him. You appear less alarmed than expected. I'm trying to figure out how they're projecting this. The figure finally spoke. Its voice sounded neither male nor female. Young nor old. It carried the strange warmth of someone remembering a favorite story. The sleeper has rested. Nobody answered. The figure continued. The listener answered. Callan blinked. Listener? The projection turned. Not toward the Queen. Toward him. You heard what others measured. Another heartbeat echoed through the chamber. The garden remembers. The image vanished. Complete silence followed. Then, the crystal crumbled into silver dust. Nobody breathed. Torin stared at the empty pedestal. That's all? The officer nodded. That is the complete message. King Edric frowned. It makes no sense. It wasn't meant for us. Every head turned toward Callan. He looked genuinely uncomfortable. Please don't. Prince Cashin folded his arms. It addressed you. I noticed. What does it mean? I have absolutely no idea. You expect us to believe that? Callan shrugged. I'd believe me. Malvik watched carefully. No deception. No calculation. If the mechanic understood the message, he hid it remarkably well. If he truly didn't, the situation had become considerably more complicated. Because someone else clearly believed he should. Seraphine stepped down from the dais. The movement alone silenced the room. She stopped beside Callan. Did any part of it sound familiar? He thought for several seconds. The heartbeat. The flagship? He nodded. Same rhythm. Torin looked sharply toward him. You're certain? I think so. You think? I didn't bring a recorder. Another brief silence. It sounded happy. The room became still again. Torin rubbed his forehead. I am asking for engineering observations. I know. You're describing emotions. Callan met the engineer's eyes. So are you. Torin frowned. What? You called the flagship exhausted. He stopped. No, he hadn't. Callan had. And somehow, everyone had accepted the description. The chief engineer slowly looks toward the Queen's flagship visible beyond the palace windows. I suppose I did. Princess Leora quietly tugged Callan's sleeve. He looked down. Yes. What's a listener? I don't know. You usually know. I usually fix cargo loaders. She accepted that answer. Then asked the question no one else had. Are you scared? Callan looked toward the dark palace windows. Far beyond them, the impossible flagship rested beneath the stars. He answered honestly. Not yet. Kaler heard it. Not yet. Not no. The mechanic understood danger. He simply refused to fear it before necessary. The commander found himself respecting that more than courage. The palace doors suddenly opened. Another officer entered. This one wasn't frightened. He was confused. Your Majesty. What is it? The flagship. Every face turned. It just activated. Torin stood immediately. Impossible. We disconnected everything. It has no external power. It shouldn't even be awake. The officer nodded. I know. He looked directly at Callan. It's requesting permission to dock. Complete silence. Torin stared. It's already docked. The officer swallowed. It isn't requesting a docking bay. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. It's requesting to come inside. No one in the grand hall spoke. The words hung in the air like a question nobody wanted to answer. Chief Engineer Torin Voss recovered first. Ships don't request entry. The young officer remained rigid. I agree. They request docking clearance. Yes. They request power. Yes. They request maintenance. Yes. Torin's voice hardened. They do not request permission to enter a palace. No, Chief Engineer. The officer swallowed. They do not. Silence settled once more. Callan looked toward the tall windows overlooking the capital. The flagship rested beyond the palace walls, its silver hull reflecting the last light of evening. From here, it looked peaceful. Almost asleep. He frowned. Can I ask something? Queen Seraphine turned toward him. Of course. Who usually tells it what to do? Torin answered before anyone else could. The command hierarchy. The Queen. My office. The fleet. Callan nodded slowly. So? He said. It spent thousands of years following orders. Yes. And today? It asked instead. No one had considered the distinction. Torin looks toward the floor. Interesting. Princess Leora quietly slipped her hand into Seraphine's, not because she was frightened. Because she sensed everyone else was. The queen squeezed her daughter's hand gently without looking down. A tiny movement. Callan noticed. Not because he was watching the queen. Because he always noticed hands. Hands revealed what faces hid. High Chancellor Malvik stepped forward. We should not respond. The room turned toward him. If we acknowledge this request, we establish a precedent. General Adrastus folded his arms. For what? Malvik met his gaze calmly. For treating a vessel as though it possesses legal agency. No one interrupted. It is a flagship. It is not a citizen. It does not receive audiences. It obeys. The logic was difficult to challenge. Until Callan quietly asked, "What if it isn't asking because it thinks it's a citizen?" Malvik looked at him. What else could it think? Callan shrugged. I don't know. Maybe it's asking because someone taught it manners. Silence. Pip slowly rotated one optic toward him. I estimate that statement will occupy the chief engineer's thoughts for several weeks. Torin almost objected. Almost. Then he remembered the flagship. Disconnected. Silent. Patient. It hadn't forced anything. It had waited. Like someone standing outside a closed workshop. Waiting to be invited in. The comparison unsettled him. Seraphine looks toward the officer. Show us. Minutes later. The grand hall emptied into the western observatory. Floor-to-ceiling crystal windows overlooked the royal docking cathedral below. The flagship rested exactly where Callan had left it. Motionless. No engines. No lights. No visible activity. It looks asleep, Leora whispered. Callan nodded. It does. The officer frowned. But the transmission came only moments ago. Callan didn't answer. Instead, he watched. Long enough that everyone else gradually fell silent. What are you looking for? Kaler finally asked. The answer. In what? The way it's waiting. A soft chime echoed through the observatory. Every communicator in the room illuminated simultaneously. Not an alarm. A notification. One sentence appeared on every screen. Request remains pending. The text lingered for exactly 3 seconds. Then disappeared. A ripple of unease passed through the gathered nobles. It repeated itself, Torin whispered. No, Callan replied. It reminded us. Seraphine stepped closer to the window. Her reflection merged with the silver outline of the flagship below. For a brief moment, Queen and ship seemed connected by nothing more than silence. What do you think it wants? She asked. Callan considered the question carefully. I don't think it wants something. He looked at the flagship. I think it wants someone. Every eye turned toward him. You. He shook his head. No. The message mentioned you? I know. But the message also called me listener. So? So listeners don't start conversations. They answer them. Another deep pulse rolled across the docking cathedral. This time, everyone heard it. Not through speakers. Not through the palace walls. Through the floor itself. The crystal beneath their feet vibrated gently. Like the heartbeat of something unimaginably large. Leora instinctively looked up at Callan. Is it angry? He smiled reassuringly. No. You don't know that. I don't. Then why smile? Because, he said softly, angry things don't usually knock first. Even Kaler couldn't suppress the faintest smile. Malvik watched the mechanic carefully. Every answer he gave reduced fear instead of increasing it. Not through confidence. Through calm. People trusted calm. That made it more powerful than certainty. The Chancellor filed away another observation. Then, every light in the observatory dimmed. Not failed. Dimmed? The flagship below began to glow. Not brightly. Softly. Thousands of microscopic lines spread across its hull like veins of liquid silver. Callan's eyes widened. There, he whispered. Torin followed his gaze. What? The growth rings. The same nearly invisible patterns he'd discovered on Kestrel Station now spread across the entire ship. Not random. Organized. Moving. The silver lines converged slowly toward the bow. Eora pressed both hands against the crystal window. It's drawing. No. Callan breathed. It's writing. The room fell completely silent. Across the impossible hull, the living metal rearranged itself into a single symbol. None of the candidates recognized it. None of the officers recognized it. Not even Torin. Only one person in the room reacted. Queen Seraphine. Her composure cracked for the first time. Just for an instant. She took one involuntary step forward. That's impossible. Callan looked at her. You've seen it before. She didn't answer. She couldn't, because the symbol carved across the flagship's living hull was the ancient royal seal of the first Queen of Asteria, a symbol that had disappeared from history over 3,000 years ago. No one spoke. The ancient symbol shimmered across the flagship's silver hull, alive with flowing light. Queen Seraphine hadn't moved. Her eyes remained fixed on the impossible mark. It can't be. Callan looked at her. You know it. For the first time since he met her, the Queen answered without guarding herself. My mother showed it to me once. Silence, she said. Her voice became quieter. Only the first Queen ever saw it. Chief Engineer Torin stepped forward. The first Queen ruled over 3,000 years ago. I know. The symbol disappeared with her. I know. Torin looked back toward the glowing flagship. Then why is it here? No one answered. The answer arrived on its own. The entire palace shook. Not violently. Gently. Like the vibration of a giant heart. The flagship wasn't moving. It was breathing. Every maintenance drone inside the docking cathedral turned together. Thousands of tiny optical lenses faced the palace. Waiting. The same way they had waited on Kestrel Station. Callan suddenly smiled. Pip noticed. You thought of something. I think. I've been asking the wrong question. The Queen turned. What question? I kept asking why the ship chose me. He slowly shook his head. It didn't. Silence. It chose. He looked at Seraphine. You. Nobody understood. Not even the Queen. Callan quietly walked toward the observatory doors. Come with me. Kaler frowned. You intend to approach the flagship? I intend to answer it. Malvik stepped forward. That would be unwise. Callan smiled politely. Probably. Then he picked up his old toolbox. But someone knocked. Nobody stopped him. Not because he held authority. Because every instinct told them this moment had been waiting far longer than any of them. They crossed the palace gardens in silence. The candidates followed. The council followed. Servants. Engineers. Guards. By the time they reached the docking cathedral, thousands had gathered. The enormous silver flagship waited exactly where Callan had left it. Still. Patient. He stopped 3 steps away. No speeches. No dramatic music. He simply rested one scarred hand against the living hull. Sorry. The words echoed softly. I think we kept you waiting. The flagship answered. Not with engines. Not with light. The silver hull became transparent. Everyone gasped. Inside, there was no reactor. No machinery. No bridge. Only the vast chamber grown from crystal. At its center stood a single chair. Empty. Princess Leora whispered. It's a throne. Callan slowly shook his head. No. He smiled gently. It's a listening chair. Nobody understood. Then the ancient voice returned. Not through speakers. Through the air itself. The first Queen did not command. The chamber trembled. She listened. The empty chair glowed softly. Every ruler afterward believed the throne granted authority. A pause. It never did. The silver chamber brightened. It granted understanding. The ancient voice slowly faded. Only one who listens before speaking may awaken the garden. Silence. Then, the light disappeared. Every eye turned toward Queen Seraphine. Tears quietly filled her eyes. Not from sadness. Relief. For 20 years, everyone had tried to find her the strongest king. The richest. The wisest. The greatest warrior. Nobody had looked for the kindest listener. Except her. High Chancellor Malvik slowly removed the council seal from around his neck. He looked toward Callan. I owe you an apology. Callan blinked. For what? I believe this sovereignty required a ruler who could command. He looked toward the living flagship. I had forgotten. Someone must first be willing to hear. Without another word, he bowed. Not to a future king. To a good man. One by one, the 40 candidates followed. Some smiled. Some laughed quietly at themselves. Some simply accepted that they had misunderstood the test from the very beginning. There had never been a competition. There had only been a question. Seraphine walked toward Callan. She stopped beside him. Very close. You repaired more than my flagship. Callan looked at the transparent hull. I don't think I did. You reminded an empire. She smiled. What it had forgotten. She reached into her sleeve. The black slate appeared one final time. 40 names. Every one crossed out. She looked at Callan. There was never space for your name. He looked confused. Why not? Because, for the first time, she took his grease-stained hand in hers. I wasn't looking for another candidate. I was looking for you. I think. He rubbed the back of his neck with his free hand. There's been a misunderstanding. A ripple of confusion spread through the docking cathedral. Seraphine looked at him. A misunderstanding? I'm a mechanic. I know. I fix engines. I know. I don't know how to rule an empire. For a heartbeat? The queen simply watched him. Then she smiled. The smile wasn't triumphant. It was peaceful. I know. Callan blinked. You keep saying that. Because you've never understood what I was searching for. The ancient flagship awakened once more. Not with blinding light. With memory. The transparent crystal chamber filled with thousands of shimmering images. The first queen. Not seated upon the throne. Walking. Listening. Children speaking to her. Engineers arguing over impossible designs. Farmers complaining about failed harvests. Pilots laughing over broken engines. She never interrupted. She listened. Only afterward did she decide. The ancient voice returned. The throne does not create wisdom. Another memory appeared. The first queen kneeling beside an exhausted mechanic whose hands were stained with grease. She thanked him before addressing her generals. It reminds rulers where wisdom begins. The memories dissolved. Silence returned. Chief Engineer Torin felt his throat tighten. His entire career? He had demanded answers. The first queen had begun with questions. He slowly walked toward Callan. The great engineer looked down at the worn brass feeler gauge still tucked inside the mechanic's pocket. I spent 3 days trying to repair that ship. Callan smiled gently. You were trying to help. I was trying to prove I could. The admission echoed through the cathedral. Torin extended his hand. You reminded me why I became an engineer. Callan shook it. You probably just needed some sleep. Torin laughed. A real laugh. For the first time in years. Commander Kaler stepped forward next. I owe you thanks. What for? I've protected the Queen for 17 years. Callan nodded. That's a long time. I always believed my duty was keeping danger away from her. His eyes moved toward Seraphine. You reminded me. Sometimes my duty is allowing the right people to reach her. He placed one fist over his heart. A soldier's salute. Not to a king. To a man he trusted. One by one. The 40 candidates approached. No speeches. No resentment. General Adrastus smiled. If you joined my army, I would have repaired your trucks. The general laughed. I believe you would have. King Edric bowed. I shall inspect my bridge when I return home. Callan looked pleased. Take the maintenance crew some lunch. The old king blinked. Then laughed louder than anyone had ever heard him laugh. I think I will. Even Prince Cassian smiled. I spent years trying to become someone worthy of a queen. He looked around the cathedral. I never thought to become someone worthy of ordinary people. Callan shrugged. They're usually harder to fool. Several candidates laughed together. For the first time. They weren't rivals. Just men who had learned something. Only Malvek remained. The Chancellor approached slowly. Age seemed to weigh heavier upon him now. He stopped before Callan. I opposed you. I noticed. I tested you. I noticed that too. I was wrong. Callan thought for a moment. No. Malvek looked up. If you'd trusted everyone. Callan smiled. You wouldn't have been a very good chancellor. The old statesman stared. Then? Unexpectedly. He laughed. Quietly. You truly are impossible. So I've been told. Malvek removed the silver seal of office from around his neck. He held it for a long moment. Then placed it into Seraphine's hands. My work is finished. The queen gently closed his fingers around it again. No. He looked confused. I still need someone willing to disagree with me. A faint smile touched his face. That. He admitted. I can still do. Princess Leora quietly tugged Callan's sleeve. My bird still sings. I'm glad. She held it carefully. Will you leave now? Callan looked toward his old toolbox. Then toward the stars beyond the docking cathedral. My workshop's probably a mess. She looked down. Oh. He smiled. But. I suppose I could visit. Promise? I don't make promises I can't keep. She held out her little finger. Callan looked at it. Is this official royal protocol? No. Good. He hooked his little finger around hers. I'll visit. Satisfied. The princess nodded. Good. Seraphine walked beside him as the crowd slowly dispersed. The palace no longer felt heavy. It felt alive. You really intend to return to Kestrel Station? Callan looked surprised. Well, I've still got Mrs. Dalen's cargo loader. She laughed softly. I thought you might. They reached the palace gardens. Morning sunlight had begun touching the crystal towers. The city was waking. Workers crossed bridges. Gardeners tended flowers. Maintenance crews polished the palace windows. Callan smiled. There they are. The window cleaners. Seraphine followed his gaze. She watched them for a long time. Then quietly said, I've never noticed them before. I figured. She looked at him. I'll know their names by tomorrow. Callan nodded once. I think they'd like that. 3 months later, Kestrel Station looked exactly as it always had. The ceiling light still buzzed louder than it shone. Half the storage cabinets still didn't match. Old Mara's cargo tug occupied the same repair bay. Callan lay beneath another battered shuttle. Blue coolant splashed directly into his face. He closed one eye. I was trying to help. Pip floated nearby. The engine remains unconvinced. The workshop door echoed. 3 quiet knocks. Not the sensor. The door. Callan smiled without looking up. Come in. The door opened. Queen Seraphine entered wearing an ordinary travel coat with no crown. Behind her, Princess Leora carried the silver bird. You're late, Leora announced. Callan slid out from beneath the shuttle and looked at the workshop clock. I make it 17 minutes. 18. He laughed. Right. Seraphine looked around the tiny workshop. Nothing had changed. Everything had. She picked up a wrench from the workbench. What needs fixing today? Callan looked at the engine. Then at the Queen. Then at the grease already staining her immaculate sleeve. He smiled. Depends. On what? He handed her the wrench. Whether you're here as a queen. Or as my apprentice. She looked down at the wrench. Then back at him. Without hesitation. She rolled up her sleeves. Outside. Life across the station continued exactly as it always had. Inside the little workshop, an emperor could have stood unnoticed. Because in that place, titles meant very little. Broken things simply came first. And somehow, that was exactly why the galaxy had finally found the people it needed.